Hey American literature friends, this is a video going over William Carlos Williams. I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about his biography, just a few biographical details. Then I'm going to go through The Widow's Lament in Springtime, Spring and All, so two spring poems but very different feelings about spring, and then Burning the Christmas Greens, one of the longer William Carlos Williams poems. I want to talk just a little bit about his biography, just to fit him in as a modernist, because there's really three big modernist American poets. There's Robert Frost, who is on the sort of conservative end of the spectrum. A lot of his poetry is formal, feels sort of old-fashioned, and so his innovations in modernism comes through in the way that he talks about things, not the sort of formal innovations very often. And then on the far left, the much more sort of experimental, progressive writer is T.S. Eliot, who did all these kinds of experimentations. His poetry is often very difficult to read because there's these obscure references and you have to know a bunch of history and mythology, and often you need like footnotes to understand what he's talking about. And then sort of in the middle, with this sort of middle of the road straddling the fence, is William Carlos Williams. He's doing some innovations like his sort of intense, vivid image poems like The Red Wheelbarrow, and This Is Just to Say, and things like that. But he's not trying to overwhelm you, or you need footnotes or anything like that. He's not trying to overwhelm you with this references or symbolism or things like that. They talk in the book about him just a little bit. As you see here, he was born in 1883. He died in 1963, so he lived a good long life. Even though he had a stroke in the he had a heart attack in the late 1940s, and then a couple of strokes in the early 1950s. So the last 10, 15 years of his life, he was a little bit incapacitated, but he was still able to get around and talk and interact with people. It was in those last 15 years of his life or so that he really influenced a new generation of poets, the poets of the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s. But like many of the modernists, by the time you get to the early 1960s, he is near the end of his life. The most important thing often when people talk about him is he was a medically trained doctor. He grew up in Rutherford, New Jersey, near Paterson, New Jersey, and like northern New Jersey. He went into the School of Dentistry, then transferred into the medical program. But while he was in medical school, he became friends with writers and started writing even then. And he always sort of had in his mind that he was going to do both, and that medicine was his sort of task, his craft, and writing was his sort of soul, his sort of spiritual release, his sort of spiritual outlet. As they say in the book, he never lost his sense that he worked as a doctor in order to be a poet. And in 1912, after an internship, and then he had studied abroad, he married his fiancée. They stayed married for the rest of his life. And he started working as a doctor in Rutherford, where he had been born and grown up. He remained in Rutherford all of his life, continuing his medical practice until his poor health forced him to retire in the late 1940s, like we talked about. He wrote at night, and on the weekends he would go visit his artist and writer friends in New York, because he was relatively close to New York City. And living outside of New York City, but relatively close, enabled him to sort of pull back and write at night on his own time, but still maintain those artistic connections that were important to him and like kept him on the cutting edge of stuff, especially in the 19-teens and 1920s. As they tell you also in the book, Williams detested T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Like I said, he found it too experimental, too heavy, too much, too sort of all caught up in itself and too artistic. Yet Williams was not a sentimental celebrant of American life. He objected to Robert Frost's homespun poetry. That's what I meant when I said you can feel him sort of in the middle of them. He's not this sort of nostalgic traditionalist like Frost, but he's not going to get crazy with symbolism and experimentalism like T.S. Eliot either. He's sort of coming right down the middle. The sickness and suffering he saw as a physician also entered his poetry, as it did his personal life. So we're going to dig into some of those poems, including Spring and All, which part of Spring and All involves him driving to the hospital, and the sort of like what he sees as he's driving to the hospital. But we're going to start with The Widow's Lament in Springtime, which is a sort of sadder poem, and then jump to Spring and All, which is a much more happy, uplifting, hopeful poem. The Widow's Lament in Springtime is built on this contrast between it is spring and new things are being born and new life is coming into the world. Spring is this happy, blossoming, blooming time. But this woman, the widow, has lost her husband. And so in the midst of all this happiness and brightness and blossoming, she is just overcome with sorrow and she feels out of place and disconnected from the happy, blooming world. Sorrow is my own yard, where the new grass flames as it is flamed. And by flaming, he means like grass growing, the blades of grass sort of flaming up. Often before, but not with the cold fire that closes around me this year. So this year is different. Spring has always been this exciting, happy time for her in the past, but not this year. 35 years I lived with my husband. The plum tree is white today with masses of flowers. So again, she looks out in the yard. The plum tree is blooming. It's blossoming. It's about to have the fruit on it. Masses of flowers load the cherry branches. And so all this new life, things are blooming and blossoming. Color some bushes yellow, some red, but the grief in my heart is stronger than they, for though they were my joy formerly. And so all these things that made her happy, her garden, the cherry tree, the plum tree, all these things that made her happy, it's almost like they're spiting her now. Like she feels totally cut off from them because she can't relate to new life, because what she's experiencing is this first period of sort of mourning and grief. Today I noticed him and turned away, forgetting. Today my son told me that in the meadows at the edge of the heavy woods in the distance he saw trees of white flowers. And so the son tries to cheer her up and is like, look, there's all this happiness in the world, all this color. I feel that I would like to go there and fall into those flowers and sink into the marsh near them. And so her response to all of this beauty is that it can't reach her, and she can't reach it. She's cut off from the sort of new life and the happiness of springtime because she's just sunk, like the last line. She's in this sort of marsh. She's sunk in the marsh of her grief, and she almost feels like she doesn't want to be here. It's not that she's suicidal. She's just indifferent. She's sort of numb, and she just wants to fall into the marsh and not feel anything because she can't relate to the outside world and all of this new life that's appearing around her. So you have this poem is built on this contrast between how she feels and the world that is all around her, and all this new life around her that used to make her happy, but now this year it's totally different because she's lost her husband. So it's this very sad poem, but it's also a particular kind of sadness because she is sad. She feels sad and isolated. Spring and All is this much happier poem, and it is also about spring, but it is about this very particular part of spring, which is like the first day of spring. There's still like a winter chill in the air. There might even be, like if you were living in New Jersey like William Carlos Williams, there might even be a little snow or frost on the ground. But there's these little signs, little hints that spring is coming. By the road to the contagious hospital, so it's like the narrator is driving to the hospital. He's driving to do his job, to see about his patients. Under the surge of the blue mottled cloud, so like the sky is clear and blue. Again, this is the sign of spring. From the northeast, a cold wind. So you're getting this mix. Y'all know this experience where in early spring you can still feel winter trying to hang on, those last little bits of winter, but spring is kind of punching through too. And that idea of punching through the frozen ground is important in this poem. Beyond the waste of broad muddy fields, again broad muddy fields because there's no grass blooming, so all the grass is dead and it's muddy. Brown dried weeds standing in falling patches of standing water. The scatterings of tall trees all along the road. The reddish, purplish, forked, upstanding, twiggy stuff of bushes. So the trees are still sort of dead and twiggy because the leaves haven't started coming out on these like hardwood trees and green bushes that haven't started blooming yet. With dead brown leaves under them, the leaves of fall that are still under all of them. Lifeless in appearance, sluggish. Dazed spring approaches. And so it's like the first little sluggish things. It's almost like the first little thaws of spring in the northeast. They enter the world naked, cold, uncertain of all save that they enter. And this is like the first little blades of grass that pop up, the first little blossoms of spring, all about them, the cold, familiar wind. Now the grass, the first thing that starts to come up. Tomorrow, the stiff curl of wild carrot leaf. So then more things bigger and more than grass, like plants and fruit trees and stuff like that, will start to bloom. So you can feel the like process of spring and the spring bloom taking hold. One by one, objects are defined. It quickens. And he means quicken in the he doesn't mean like it quickens like it goes faster. He means it in the old-timey sense of quickening, which is in the old days, the first time that the mother felt the baby move, a pregnant woman felt a baby move in her stomach, would be the quickening, because it was this sign that the baby was alive in there now. So he's using it in that old-timey way of the world is quickening like a baby, like the world is being born. You can feel the world being born again, almost like the first movement of the baby. Again, this sort of first early movement, the first early birthing of spring. But now the stark dignity of entrance, still the profound change has come upon them, rooted. And so that's like they've got their roots down and they're ready to start punching up, coming up, blooming. They grip down and begin to awaken. And so think like all of the vegetable life, the plant life is like rooted down and ready to start springing up and coming to life as spring goes forward. So this is this hopeful poem that's focused on this very particular moment, which is that very specific moment, the very beginnings of spring, where there's still like the cold north wind and the grass is all still brown, but spring is taking hold and beginning to take hold. And then the last poem, which is Burning the Christmas Greens, which is also about a very particular moment. This poem is about the time period. It's almost like this poem is about the week after Christmas and then New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. It's about this very particular time of year. And burning the Christmas greens, he's not talking about like collard greens or anything like that. What he means is the old-timey tradition of people decorating their houses with greenery, like deck the halls with boughs of holly. Boughs of holly means like limbs from a holly tree. And the real carryover that we still have from this is wreaths on the door, which are wreaths, if you don't have a fake wreath, wreaths were originally made from real greenery. And the Christmas tree is obviously green. If you've got a live tree, that's a Christmas green. Like he means bringing in all these green things, like kissing under mistletoe. Mistletoe is a green plant, and people would decorate their houses with it. And so there is all this traditional greenery, like Christmas tree, like fir trees for Christmas trees, and deck the halls with boughs of holly, like the holly bushes and the mistletoe. What he's talking about, and people used to also decorate their trees with popcorn and stuff like that. So what he's talking about is the old-timey tradition of Christmas decorations that were made from organic stuff, like poinsettias and fir trees and holly and mistletoe. And at the end of Christmas, taking down those decorations. And instead of putting them away for next year, what people used to do is, by the time next year rolled around, they'd just be old and dead. So what you would do is take all the Christmas greens down and burn them. You might take the tree outside and burn it, but all the little stuff like the mistletoe and the holly and stuff like that, you would throw in the fireplace, use it to make a fire, because it'd been getting dry for like a week or maybe more inside your house as decorations. Their time passed, so it's all the Christmas greens. Their time has passed. Christmas is come and gone. Pulled down, cracked, and flung to the fire, go up in a roar. They're all dried out from being inside. All recognition lost, burnt clean in the flame, the green dispersed, because it's dried out, turned brown. A living red flame, red as blood, wakes on the ash. And that's an important image in this poem, because this poem becomes about how burning the Christmas greens is part of how you burn away the old year and give birth, almost like the mythical phoenix. You give birth to the new year. So you burn the Christmas greens, and out of the fire of the Christmas greens, out of the old green, you get the red fire, and then the birth of the new year is birthed out of that fire. A living red, flame red as blood, wakes on the ash and ebbs to a steady burning. The rekindled bed become a landscape of flame. And so it's that fire that renews and gives birth to the new year. At the winter's midnight, we went to the trees. The coarse holly, there's the deck the halls with boughs of holly, balsam and hemlock for their green. At the thick of the dark, the moment of the cold's deepest plunge, we brought branches cut from the green trees to fill our need. And over doorways and about paper Christmas bells covered with tinfoil and fastened by red ribbons. Again, these old-timey Christmas decorations where you'd hang this stuff on the walls and over doorways. That's where the kissing under the mistletoe comes from, is you would hang mistletoe over the doorway. We stuck the green prongs in the windows, hung woven wreaths, and above pictures, the living green. On the mantle, we built a green forest. So you decorate the mantle above your fireplace. A green forest, and among those hemlock sprays put a herd of small white deer as if they were walking there. All this, and it seemed gentle and good to us. Their time passed, so now that Christmas is gone, the decorations time has passed. Relief, the room bare. Y'all know this feeling. You take down all your Christmas decorations and the room feels a little bare. Things are back to normal. We stuffed the dead grate, that's the grate in the fireplace where you pile up logs and stuff. With them upon the half burnt out log's smoldering eye, opening red and closing under them, and we stood there looking down. Green is a solace, a promise of peace, a fort against the cold, a challenge above the snow's hard shell. Green, where small birds hide and dodge and lift their plaintive rallying cries, blocks for them and knocks down the unseen bullets of the storm. Green spruce boughs pulled down by a weight of snow, transformed. And so that's what's happening in the fireplace. They're being transformed from their old greenness into the fire, and then the fire gives birth, much like a phoenix in Greek mythology, to the new year. Roared to life as the flame rose through and our eyes recoiled. Y'all know this, like you throw something on the fireplace and the fire comes up and you're like, whoa. In the jagged flames, green to red, instant and alive, green, this sure abutments, gone, and quick in the contracting tunnel of the grate appeared a world. Black mountains, black and red, so that's stuff burning up and turning to ash, turning black. Ash white. An infant landscape. That's the new year, the infant landscape. Everything is white, everything is burned away and white and fresh and clean, like this sort of gray ashes. That's the new year. It's clean, it's white, it's a new slate. Ash and flame, and we in that instant, breathless to be witnesses, as if we stood ourselves, refreshed among the shining fauna of that fire. And so that's that refreshed among the shining fauna. Everything is refreshed. It's a new year. All the old stuff has been burned away. There's nothing left but the clean, the ashes of last year. All the old stuff has been burned away. And so the burning of the Christmas greens is this sort of symbolic goodbye to the old year and giving birth to the new year. And you burn away all the old, and it gives birth to this new clean landscape for the new year. So it is this sort of happy poem where you say goodbye to the old, to the last celebration of the old year, burn it away, and welcome in the new year. So it's this nice sort of moment of the year. This poem's about this very particular moment of the year, when you burn away the old and welcome the new. That gives you the widow's lament in springtime, spring and all, and then burning the Christmas greens. So 2 spring poems and then a Christmas and New Year poem. So all 3 very particular times of year. I hope that's helpful for you in understanding all 3 of those poems and William Carlos Williams. If you want to dig a little deeper into him, or you've got questions about any of these poems or about him, just be in touch. Otherwise, thanks for your time today.